revenue for organizations on average. Um, so again, that was grants on normally are about a third of total revenue for nonprofit organizations on average. But for smaller organizations, grants are most of their major gifts, which is a term that we use in nonprofit and fundraising to talk about, the gifts that have the most importance for organizations, and are their largest gifts that they get. And so for a lot of social services, arts, smaller organizations in general, grants are the biggest source of donations for those organizations, usually. So today we're going to go through what kind of grant writer experience you should look for, a cost of a grant writer, how long it usually takes to hire a grant writer, thinking about the amount of work that you want them to do, and then alternatives to hiring a full-time grant writer if you're not big enough for a full-time grant writer yet. So what certifications should a grant writer have? One is a minimum of a bachelor's degree. The reason is that grants require the ability to kind of read and analyze and synthesize a lot of resources and information, and to write kind of a research paper. And so somebody with a degree usually has experience in writing a lot of papers, because that's what it takes to earn a degree. A master's degree or higher is also very good, because again, the more formal education somebody has had, the more papers they've likely had to write and have written, and the more research they're used to doing. There are also some professional certifications that you can look for. Within fundraising, there is the Certified Fundraising Executive, CFRE certification. To get that, somebody has to have at least 5 years of experience in fundraising, demonstrate an understanding of ethics and best practices, and they have to recertify every 3 years and keep up with continuing education to stay up to date in the field. There's also another certification called a Grant Professional Certificate, or a GPC. That's similar to a CFRE, and that somebody has to have been in the business for long enough, with enough experience in grant writing to qualify, and then they have to sit for and pass a test to show that they have sufficient grant writing knowledge. And the Grants Professionals Association, they are the group of, they're the professional association for grant writers. And from their 2022 survey of grant writers, what they found is that only 14% of grant writers have a recognized professional certification. But it is a really important distinguisher to know that somebody is a true grant writer with proven experience and knows the industry standards, and not just somebody who thinks that they can write a grant, for lack of a better term. Somebody who's a writer in general and decides that they can write grants too. Grant writing is a specific skill, kind of like the difference between doing plumbing in your house on your own and hiring a plumber to fix I live in Texas, so like to fix a foundation leak or something like that. Sometimes it's worth it to have somebody with a certification and knows what they're doing to make sure that your house doesn't flood. This is a personal example story, so don't have that experience. There's also, you can also look at what kind of experience a person should have that would be applying to be a grant writer. You want them to have experience with a variety of different grant writing tasks. That would be finding grants, searching for grants, applying to grants, applying to different types of grants, whether that's private foundation or government. Depending on the size of the organization, sometimes people are looking for a grant writer and they only need government grant writing experience. Sometimes they're looking for somebody with only foundation grant writing experience. And sometimes they're looking for one person who can do both roles. And so it's important to know before you start hiring what type of grant writing experience it is that you want. And then also, most importantly, you want to make sure that they have a track record of actually winning grants. If they can't tell you how many dollars they've raised in winning grants, then um, you should consider that in your analysis of how much money they would win for you writing grants. Um, when you're thinking about how much a full-time grant writer will cost, the Grant Professionals Association has done a salary survey, and they have found that the average compensation nationally for a grant writer was the salary was $78,569. The average nonprofit fringe rate is about 25%, which results in an average grant writer cost of $98,211 per year for the average organization. That is for an average grant writer, just somebody who you think of as having, 3 to 5 years worth of experience in grant writing specifically. Um, Obviously, whenever you hire somebody with credentials or more experience, you could pay more than that. Um, and a grant writer is an investment in your organization. Grant writers should be able to make more than their salary in the funding that they win for you, so that you have a positive return on your investment. Um, some people ask me sometimes, can I hire somebody who's never done grants before to do grants and pay them less money? And of course, you can do that. You just have to consider whether or not they might win your organization grants. If your total cost of hiring somebody without any grant writing experience, let's say is, I was going to pick a number like $60,000, but they win you no grants, then you lost $60,000. If you pay somebody like a total cost of $98,000, but they win you $300,000, then you made $200,000 on that deal. So when you're thinking about grant writers and salaries, it's important to think about it in what your return on the investment is going to be more than just the cost of somebody's salary. Another consideration is how long it might take to hire a grant writer. I don't know if anybody on here has tried to hire anybody recently, and I can't see the chat. But most people I know in nonprofits who are looking to hire people right now are having a hard time hiring. They're it has been slow for them to find people to fill all kinds of different positions, and fundraising and grant writing are not an exception to that rule. Um, there was a nationwide job survey for nonprofits that found that 75% of them were having trouble filling job vacancies of any kind. I think this mirrors things going on in the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. The top reasons that people reported they had trouble finding somebody to fill their vacancies was salary competition, budget constraints, and people just being stressed and burned out. And so in this survey, and in my experience talking with people who've been trying to hire grant writers, usually what I'm hearing is that they're spending 6 months or more trying to find a full-time grant writer. Some things that you can do that can make this better are things that have happened since COVID for all of us. You could look at things like a hybrid work environment, letting people work from home, flexible schedules, those kinds of things that do make positions more competitive, especially for grant writers. As grant writers are usually introverts who want to stay at home and their job can be done from anywhere. And they are one of those positions that generally doesn't understand why they need to come to an office in order to do their job well. An important thing to consider as you hire is if you have enough work for a full-time grant writer, and that would include your organization's size, where you're located, and the history of your organization. The Grant Professional Association survey has found that the median number of grants won per organization across the country is 20. And so depending on if those are 20 private foundations or 20 government applications, or a combination of the two, determines if that's enough work for a full-time grant writer. If it's 20 private foundation applications, that's probably not enough work for a full-time grant writer. If it's 20 government grant applications, then that's probably too much work for just one full-time grant writer. Those are some things to consider when you think about if you need a full-time position. Part-time positions are something that can be done. Some of the challenges specifically around part-time positions are that they're generally the last positions to be filled, because if somebody has experience and they're an in-demand candidate, they can get a full-time job somewhere. And most people want benefits if they're going to work. And so, they're looking for full-time work. And so the part-time candidates tend to be candidates with less experience, and tend to attract a lot less applicants than full-time positions. When it comes to geography, a point that I forgot to mention is that, if you're in a metro area, a large city, a full-time grant writer might make a lot of sense because there are a lot of funding prospects in large cities, versus people in more rural areas. Generally, there's fewer funders in rural areas than there are in cities in general. If it is that your organization is too small or not ready for a full-time grant writer, or can't find a full-time grant writer or a part-time grant writer, consultants can help kind of pick up the slack there. They can generally tailor services to an organization's needs, and fit services within whatever your budget is. They can typically begin services really quickly instead of waiting months on end to hire somebody and get them through whatever your background check or onboarding process is. And they can generally do work at a lower cost point than hiring somebody full-time. And so I will pause there and see if you'll have any questions.
Hey, Alex, I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
You said the medium grants for a company organization is 20 grants a year. You mean somebody is writing 20 grants a year for an organization?
I mean the median number of awards. So the median number of awards per organization across the country is 20.
Really?
For the historical time period for each of the nonprofits, whether they've been in business for 1 year or 100 years, right? It's historical.
So this is a survey that's done of all grant writers, not all grant writers, a sample of grant writers nationally by the Grants Professionals Association. And so they do a survey of grant writers nationally, and they ask 1 million questions. It's a survey that takes like an hour to fill out. And one of the questions that they ask is, how many awards does your organization have? And so everybody puts in their number of awards. And then they do their statistical analysis to come up with the mean and the median. I report the median number because the mean number, as you know, can be pulled If there's like a university that has like, I mean, a major university might have 100 awards, like a truly major university that does a lot of research. And really small organizations might have one. And so the average can get pulled pretty extremely one way or the other.
But
Um,
is that based like on a fiscal year basis, or is that like historical for the whole existence of, like I said, a place from being, whether they've been in 1 year? It's like,
oh,
is it
no, no,
a
no, that's per
historical number
year.
year after year, or
Yeah, that's per year, like in an average year,
per
they have
year?
20
Per year.
awards.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Um, even though I have, like I said, sort of, you might say, as a consultant for me, two nonprofits, I have ideas of my little free tidbit I always tell people is because everyone wants to go after grants because it's where you get the big money. And I always tell everyone about a piece of a big cake that's got frosting on it. And I said, everyone relates the big part of the cake to the grant money because it's the biggest part of the cake and you get biggest chunks of money, and that the frosting is just a little bit of your sort of donors making your organization look pretty in a sense, you know. And I tell people it's the complete opposite. You need, as a business, need to like have your cake needs to be all your donors and your frosting needs to be your grants in a sense, which is completely opposite in today's logic and thinking. Um, what are some, like, a little thing related to that in terms of trying to, when like one of my clients will admittedly say we are a dominantly grant funded organization, and of course I've told them that story, that little tidbit, which of course some people listen to me, many people, you know, don't listen to me. It just depends when I provide advice related to that. But what thoughts you have on that whole dynamic in terms of grant writing and sort of getting a fundraising base and stuff? Just because most of these places feel like they, even though they're grant funded, they'll feel like they can't pay for anything, and that's because they're not good at fundraising.
Yeah, so it definitely is a balance. You don't want to do just grants, or I would argue you also don't want to do just fundraising. You don't want to leave any money on the table, I think, is the bottom line. Don't leave any money on the table. Go after all of the money, and go after all of the money as hard as you can. Um, is kind of my philosophy. It is interesting. So this, my first slide back. Oh, this one. So this is the national split on, you know, the revenue from grants versus all other sources nationally. What I have found in practice is that this is all nonprofits. That includes churches, that includes universities, that includes, you know, so I think that you have to be, in my opinion, I try to be a little careful when you're taking this national kind of number and applying it to everybody. Because in my experience, especially social service organizations, they're the ones that come to mind the most, where they do tend to be more grant heavy, because there's less of an individual donor appeal. So for instance, like this chart that or the Giving USA chart that kind of breaks out the giving by source. I mean, that includes, like I said, you know, churches are still the majority of charitable giving in this country, and most of that is individual giving, and not corporate giving or foundation giving or whatever, or government giving. And so it's hard to apply national numbers to individual organizations. There are kind of like sector or industry, maybe is the right term, within nonprofits. Kind of you can dig into the numbers and end up with splits like by social services, arts, higher education, like all of that, and get kind of more detailed numbers. But to me, you're right. Like their whole strategy should not be grants. I would say that their whole strategy also shouldn't be special events or individual giving or planned giving. You need a balanced approach. Because if COVID taught us anything, it is that things can change on a dime. And the more diversified your funding is, the safer you're going to be.
Hey, Alex, can
The
you go to
long
your next slide?
answer.
Can you go to your next slide? Because I want to ask you, does all grant writers, oh, that one. Does all grant writers need to be certified, and how do they get certified?
Um, all grant writers do not need to be certified. I recommend if you don't know the person and they can't tell you how much money they've raised and you don't have any proof of their success, a certification is a good safety check. So to get a CFRE, you have to have been in fundraising for 5 years. You have to have raised a certain amount of money and you apply. And then if you qualify based on your application, you can sit for an exam. And then if you pass the exam and the application, then you get a CFRE. And the grant professional certificate is pretty similar. You apply, you have to be in the industry for a certain number of years before you can apply. You have to have raised a certain amount of money before you can apply. And then if they accept your application, you can sit for an exam. And if you pass the exam and the application, you get the certificate.
Even and talk a little, Alex, a little bit like about whether it's colleges, universities, or some other entities. And I give you, for example, like I said, like most of us growing up, there was nothing at college related to getting a degree like in nonprofit management or something like that, right? Or nonprofit grant writing, fundraising. There was nothing. Now these things exist. Like for example, through Duke University here in Durham, there is like a whole nonprofit management degree, and there's a lot more, but because I'm sort of away from all that, I don't, and it's not what I'm trying, I've been out of college for almost 40 years or something. So talk with anything that about these types of, whether it's colleges or any other entities that are trying to, like I said, train people on how to do fundraising and grant writing and stuff like that, and nonprofit management.
So that definitely is very new to the industry and the market. I would say that all of that has happened in the last 10 years, if not shorter. It is a trend that's growing for sure. I don't have a degree in either of those things. My background is actually social work. But I having somebody who has been, for instance, through a grant writing class is a valuable thing. I would say the value of a certificate or a certification like these ones that I've listed here is that they have to pass like a specific exam that says that they meet these industry standards. Whereas, to use a college course example, well, in college, I was such a nerd. I was such a nerd. I've never stopped being a nerd. I was such a nerd in college. I had a 4.0. I like never got a B. I graduated summa cum laude. I studied all the time. I was a total nerd. My husband, who was, my perfect balance, we met in college. His saying was D's get degrees. So for instance, somebody could take a nonprofit management program and get straight D's and get a degree, or straight C's and get a degree, whatever the standard is at that university. And that's very different than the person who has a certification or had a 4.0 in that program or whatever.
So
My kids are, well, last one will graduate college here in December, but the other one's out. And yeah, even they both boys have taken the idea that, and they were doing this even in high school, even though they did fairly well, but their favorite phrase, yeah, C's, like, don't worry, Dad, C's get degrees, something like that.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Hey,
I
Alex,
kind of, I kind of wish I'd done it that way, but I didn't. Yes, ma'am.
what's the difference between the GPC and the CRFE? I know I just heard you say you have to take exams, but what's the difference between those? Or is there a difference, or is one better than the other?
Wow. That I can give you my very biased opinion,
Okay.
and it is extremely biased. My very biased opinion is that I have a CFRE and I think it's better. I have lots of people who work with me and who I think do a great job who have a grant professional certificate, a GPC. The CFRE is a general fundraising certificate that also includes grants. What I think makes it better is that it also brings in individual fundraising concepts and a little bit of like marketing concepts, which I think when applied to grants are important because it kind of teaches you to look for people's unique selling points and then to also think about the individual who is reading the application, who is a person that is a donor. And so you want to use fundraising techniques a little bit that work for individuals, because at the end of the day, it is individuals making this decision. And the grant professional certificate is more is not about those kind of softer grant writing skills. If you think about like hard skills versus soft skills.
What does it take to achieve to get a grant professional certificate, Alex?
Yeah, so you have to have a certain number of years of grant experience. You have to have raised a certain number of dollars in grants, and then you apply. You fill out an application and apply. And then if you are accepted, then you can sit for the exam. And most people usually study for the exam for a year. And they have to pass an exam in several different components. There's a writing portion of both exams. It's ethics, it's grant management, it's a writing portion. It's like technical questions about what is the best answer for things. It's just like taking a test in school.
So
And in the chat, Janine had put, which my answer would just real quickly, Janine, would be yes, it'd be mutually helpful. But I'll read the thing and let Janine and my answer, I don't even have to get into really why. I think there's a lot of good reasons why it could help both entities. But anyway, Alex, Janine says, as a very young nonprofit, still small, I wonder if it would be a good idea to connect with someone working towards a certificate and how to find them. It could be mutually helpful, question mark.
Yes, that's an option. That's an option.
Thank you.
How to, I don't know, as far as how to find them, that is something that I don't know, because they don't like post a list of people who are pursuing it. It would be more along the lines of, as you're talking to people, you could ask them, I think.
There's organizations that give the certificates. What if we tried to connect with them and say, would this be interesting to any of your, constituents working towards getting one of these certificates? I just think we're so small. I don't know if it would make sense to work towards, getting one of the higher salaried professional grant writers at this point, but there's so many projects that we've got on the back burner that are very grant worthy, but I want somebody, I wouldn't know how to go around. I don't have time as the CEO. I don't have time to look for it. So I really do need someone. And I just thought it would be helpful if somebody's working towards it. How do they get people, to help them work towards getting their certificate too?
You know
So
what I would suggest, Jean, if you hire someone and first, when you're hiring them, see what their writing skills are and then invest in them maybe to become a grant writer. But the only thing about that, sometimes if you do that and they get all their certificates, they may leave you. That's the only thing that, you may be at risk.
but then I will also have had the experience
Mhm, mhm.
checking them out and what it's involved with. So it would be a learning experience on both ends. And if they leave, they leave, and you get somebody else,
Right,
One of,
right.
one of
go.
the things in terms of just another related to, again, running nonprofits as I did was, um, it's usually, and this is what every board is trying to look at, is like, how much money do you currently have at the moment? And maybe how much of that is somewhat going to be spoken for, right?
Right.
And then sometimes if places then say, well, how much, as a board would we be willing to, put out? And that sometimes that first decision shows a half decent amount about your organization and your board. But then even if it's not a whole lot, even if your place says, hey, we can only give out $1,000 to someone to write one grant or something, um, that still might be worth it,
Yeah.
even just to go after one grant with that $1,000. But then the next level question to the board would be, okay, board members, if we only have 1,000 that everyone's willing to sort of give out, and you may have to do this anonymously with pieces of paper handed in or something, so you're not exposing anybody, but saying how much of each board member would you be willing to put in, whether it's $10, $20 or $500, $1,000, whatever it is. And then maybe, and I'm not sure you'd want to, I guess you might end up doing that inside a meeting and have somebody like yourself maybe just add up those numbers quickly. And then if all of a sudden that comes up, whether it's another 500 or it comes up with another 1,000, 2,000 or something like that, then you might say that, hey, collectively, you guys just told me on your little note paper that you all collectively would be willing to put in another 15 or $100 or $2,000. And that puts us up to 2,500, 30, 3,000 or something. And then that again, and if everyone's happy with doing that, then that's how technically you might even just get going with doing that. But I mean, I understand the idea. I deal with clients because I don't do grant writing, and that's not one of our services. Is that, yeah, a lot of these places are doing everything, like their own board members are the one writing all the grants, and sometimes it's very interesting how, you cannot assume if people are good or bad at this stuff. Just from normally you'd look at a board and go, well, who's good at really writing grants, right? But if they can do one grant that does something, you start recognizing, well, 2 to 5 people put in their time to do it. But yeah, and some of it comes down, like I said, to what is the board willing to do or not to do, and that's the other question, is to ask everybody, what are you willing and not willing to do? Because that, again, that at least exposes, if everyone says, I'm not a grant writer, I'm not writing grants, then you sort of know, at least that right then and there, you've got to go outside your organization when so much stuff happens inside the organization. But that, some of those questions help you get going to find out if someone's going to have to write it for free or whether you've got a few $1,000s, and I mean, at least I know, yeah, usually people would say the people that are going to get you the most money or write the most grants, it is going to cost the most. The people that have had the most success rates. I know grant writers that even, well, they're so good, they'll charge you up front just to have a conversation with them. Some will have your first initial thing for free. So everyone is really different. There's even a lady I know that her whole company trains people on how to write to be grant writers, and every one of them charges like a whole different thing. And so you have to at least understand as a board what you're going to be willing to spend as much as possible before going in to talking to somebody. Because if someone charges you, want to charge you 5, 10,000, that's the way it's going to be. And we only have 3, then you at least you'd probably say this isn't a good fit, you know. And if someone's, you know, if you got 3,000, they're going to do it for 1,000, 2,000, you might end up going, I'm not sure this is even the right person either, because
Right.
they
Okay.
may not have the feel like they have the expertise or something. So it is trying to find that perfect balance, but you have to understand, at least as a board, what you're willing to spend or what you're willing to raise to make these things happen. And if
Okay.
no one's going to raise any
Mark,
money, then
I'm gonna need to cut you off because we're
yeah.
gonna let Alex go and our time is kind of running down. Not sure if Alex or Elliot or Darren has any questions before we let Alex continue. Okay, Alex, if you want to continue. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm in the questions. Thank you part. Sorry.
That's okay. No, thank you.
Alex,
Thank you.
I have a question for you. This is,
Yes.
and I apologize because I came on later today and I was having a problem with Alignable. But what would you say, or I'm interested to know how you began doing this, because obviously when you haven't done a grant and you haven't had any success yet because you haven't done it, you haven't gotten certified. How did you start?
So in college, I was getting a bachelor's degree in social work. And to prepare you in social work, they send you out as an intern so that you don't get paid anything. You learn exactly how hard the work is and you can decide if you want to do it or not. And so while I was at my internship, um, they needed help writing a grant. And so I did it. And they liked it. And I did another one. And then they liked it. And I did another one. And then they won all of them. And I thought, huh, that was kind of fun. I liked that. I like writing. I've always been a writer. In high school, I wrote a lot. And so I was like, huh, that was kind of fun. And then I went and got a master's degree and I got an internship, and the same thing happened where they needed help writing a grant. So I did. And they needed help writing a grant. So I did. Then they won a couple, and I was like, hey, this is fun. I like this. And so it's all that I have ever done professionally. And I am one of those people who was really lucky to fall into it and love it and keep going. So after I had done it for 5 years, I got the CFRE and just kept going and stuff like that since then.
Alex, about how many millions of dollars have you raised or won?
111.
Wow.
So you must be a very high in demand if you still do grant writing, or how do you decide how much you're going to charge somebody?
So I am my company, we've got project rates that are established. And if you go to my website, you can request a price sheet and it'll send you a price sheet if you're interested. So I'm pretty set in what I charge everybody. And yeah.
And Alex, you have a team, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm the yes, I have a team. Short answer.
Mhm.
Yes.
Wow. Very
So,
nice.
Like a unicorn.
I love it. It's a lot of fun.
No, but I mean, you're like a unicorn because you're just different. You're very unique in that you wound up dedicating your life to this by working through other pathways. And it just kept going back, as opposed to somebody who says, you know what, I love to write just like you. I love helping nonprofits. I want to be able to help others. You know, I wrote all my life. I went to college. I studied communications. Hey, I want to help other people do grant writing. But then it becomes, well, you haven't gotten a degree, you haven't gotten a certificate, you don't have a CFRE, you haven't been in social work. So is it discouraging then for other people who, how would you advise someone if they were interested in doing this, or do you coach people? Helping others, or are you like your own entity and that's it? Whereas there are other people that may have less experience that may be able to work with people smaller like Janine, where they'd never be able to afford you. And Janine isn't able to, let's say, hire her own staff person. So even though she'd love to have your talent, she can't afford you.
Right. So, you know, if you can't afford somebody full time, then you absolutely should use a freelancer or a contractor. You should just be very careful in what it is that their qualifications are. And you should also go into it always with your eyes wide open, knowing that nobody can guarantee you funding. I cannot guarantee funding, nobody can guarantee funding. And so you just have to go into it with your eyes wide open about that. For people who are wanting to get into grant writing, I always recommend that people join the Grant Professionals Association and join a chapter. They have grant trainings that are going on pretty continuously, as well as a good online library of resources. And so that's a really good first step. There are now a lot of courses to take. It's a lot easier now to get into it than it was when I luckily fell into it, because as Mark mentioned earlier, there are lots of university programs now that offer a class in this that you could take. And then I would say that what they should do after they do some classes is honestly, in an ideal sense, they would volunteer for somebody and do it a few times and get some experience under their belt. And then they would look for like a part-time job or like a freelance job to increase their experience and go from there.
Okay.
Or they can conversely, on the other end, they could go work for a really big organization that has like a whole team of grant writers, hospitals, universities, really big nonprofits sometimes have whole teams of grant staff, and they can get like an entry level position in that and like learn from people that supervise them, you know, and from peers that have more experience.
Can new individuals like